Like, how do you become a more intentional person?
That's a really good question. Because, yeah, like, how do you become intentional about something that you don't know what you need to be intentional about?
What might you not be telling me that I need to know so we can kind of address that?
This is my best idea of, like, how you should be helped. Like, this is what you should do. And just even hearing, like, those shoulds come out of my mouth, I'm like, well, that's not what therapy's for.
How do you help someone kind of get out of their anxious thoughts and anxious tendencies?
This sounds condescending, but let's just simplify it. If you want something to be different, take the steps to make something different for yourself. And when we look at things head on and call it out for what it is, it becomes a lot less scary, and we see that it is maybe a lot smaller than what it actually is.
And those boundaries aren't there to keep other people out. Those
Right.
boundaries are there to know how much I can handle and how much I want to share. What did it feel like to have someone say, don't share your story, don't share this story? Because to me that sounds a little bit crushing.
Oh, for sure. I felt immediately crushed. But in that moment, I was just like, I just felt really empty. And I didn't know what to do.
Tell me the best advice you've ever heard.
The best advice I ever heard was from, I think I said this in our last podcast. This was from my therapist, Brooke, shout out, and also the Bible. What is brought into the light becomes light. That is the best advice.
Tell me more.
Before she ever said that to me, and before I even had ever read that verse in Ephesians, that was something I already kind of lived by, and like had just like a basic understanding of, when I share things, I feel better. When I share things, I create community, and things become, for lack of a better word, saying better again. Like, they become better, like, when they're out in the open. And that's what I've learned, like, through the therapy process with her, but also with my clients and just in general life, is when I share things and when things are brought outside of my body and into the light, they have an opportunity to become good, to be made good, and the darkness or the roots that are formed in isolation or in keeping things inside doesn't happen. It doesn't have that hold over you anymore.
You kept saying the word better.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
I think just like this umbrella word of like feeling lighter, feeling less controlled by whatever it is, the thing that I'm keeping in. It feels less scary. But yeah, I think better is really tying a lot to, it doesn't control you when it's brought out into the light.
Yeah, as a therapist, how do you get clients to feel quote unquote better?
That is a really interesting question. Well, it's actually something my clients have given the feedback on is at the end of a session, like, I feel so much better just in general. But no, when you connect that to with what I just said, like, they feel so much better that they just shared all the things that they did. So I found that that could probably be true, that when you're sharing things with somebody else, you feel better, you feel lighter, you feel seen, and like all of those things feed into just feeling better.
Yeah.
But I think on a deeper note, and I've shared this with you before, the big bulk of the work that I'm doing is creating awareness with clients. And once they've created a lot of awareness is when they're able to start coping or changing things, now that they know what is to be changed or what they actually want to be changed. And that allows them to feel better.
How do you get someone to that point of awareness?
Definitely takes some time. Building rapport is really important in that aspect of creating awareness. So only then, once I have rapport, can we maybe be a little bit more direct, and creating a lot of safety and being able to call people out. But Most of them come to it a lot on their own, just like in the natural, like guiding process, like you understand that. But in just like asking some deeper questions and just giving some reflection questions and giving the space to be quiet to think about it is when they kind of come to some of those conclusions on their own.
Yeah. I'm curious to know how you create safety in your therapy space. Some therapists might do it differently, but how do you, as Jillian, create a safe space?
It's hard to answer that without sounding maybe like boastful or prideful or arrogant. Because I think the gifts that I've been given just come naturally in creating safety for other people. Just by like maybe the tone that I use or maybe the words that I use, just like the energy that I give off, I think naturally creates safety for people. But I found too, like there's this normal kind of like natural progression of like the first 5 minutes of a session where it's kind of like, yeah, like these cicadas are dive bombing me. Have you seen these? And they're like, yeah, these are disgusting. I'm like, yeah, when one touches me, we're like sharing, connecting on just like normal life, everyday things that I think over time, like those little minutes and moments just like build up to create a connection of safety as well. But I think something also that has created a lot of safety for my clients is in that first session, I really aim to ask all parts of them. And that's something that I really prioritize is the client is a whole person. Like we are all whole people. So inviting and welcoming all parts of you, whether that's like spirituality, whether it's like your family background, it's just any and all things about you that create who you are. And just asking the question, like, does this ring true to you? Like, is this something that you practice? What is this like in your life? And just allowing space and opportunity for them to bring that into the room, I think also naturally creates a lot of safety. Like, oh, when we don't talk about things, or like if I don't ask the question, then it could create the narrative that this isn't something that we're allowed to talk about here. So I think in being really upfront and direct about certain things kind of creates this idea that, okay, like we can talk about all these things and like she's somebody that I can share these things with.
Yeah. So as a mental health therapist, you do more than just mental health.
What do you mean?
When you mention the whole person, talking about spirituality may or may not be mental health.
Sure.
Talking about family stuff may or may not be mental health.
Sure.
I think there can be a misconception that I've found that clients come in and say, I can only talk about my depression. I can only talk about my anxiety.
Yeah.
But it sounds like your goal is to get them to realize that you care about them as a whole, not just about their issues that they're presenting.
Sure, but like I think all of those things are all connected to the issues that are presenting.
Tell me more.
I think that like day-to-day stuff happening with your family is probably playing a role to some degree in your depression or your spirituality or potentially lack thereof if you're wanting that or if you're not. I just think everything is connected in that way. I don't necessarily look at it in like a systems-based approach. It still is very more like one-to-one. But like getting the full context of everything starts to make a lot more sense in those presenting issues.
Worst advice you ever heard?
That's a good question. Worst advice? I don't know if this can be shared in the podcast, but the worst advice I was given was in a really hard time several months ago. Somebody told me, quote, word for word, stop sharing this story. And that directly goes against the best advice I ever heard.
Yeah. What did it feel like? And details can be as much as you want. What did it feel like to have someone say, don't share your story, don't share this story? Because to me that sounds a little bit crushing. But what did you feel like?
Oh, for sure. I felt immediately crushed. And I felt really confused by that too, because this was somebody I really trusted. And when I'm living by the best advice I ever heard, that is also biblical truth, felt even more confusing. So conflicted, torn, confused, but also just really sad, really crushed, potentially frustrated. But in that moment, I was just like, I just felt really empty. And I didn't know what to do.
How do you bounce back from that feeling?
It took a while to bounce back from that particular experience and that feeling. I definitely had to sit with that for a while. But having people who I call upon as like my sounding board, who really know me, and especially like who knew the situation, like knew the details of everything that was going on, those are the people that I found a lot of grounding in, that brought me back to the truth, and what is helpful and what allows me to be the most authentic version of myself.
I think it's important to share those things to some extent, because as a therapist, me included, sometimes we can be seen, whether it's right or wrong, as they don't have any mental health issues, they have it all together, when it's not true. And going back to your best advice of how do I cultivate safety, it's like, it's really just being a human with them.
Just being real,
every
just being
client's
authentic.
nervous.
Yeah.
They're always like, are they going to think I'm weird? Do they think
Yeah.
I'm crazy?
Totally.
But really, it's just talking about cicadas.
Right.
And how weird cicadas are. That's all it is.
Yeah. And I think creating that aspect too is like, you and I are humans too. And creating like normalcy. Normalcy? Normalcy?
That's a word.
Is
Normalcy
it?
is a word.
Is it?
It's a word.
Am I using it right?
I can't confirm or deny that.
I don't know. Normalization? That's not a word.
I don't think that it's a word. It just doesn't. We're all
just creating a sense of
it's a normality.
normal.
It's a normality.
That doesn't feel like it belongs there either. Why are there so many words with the word normal in it?
Doesn't feel normal to me.
Not one bit. That's a Jim Elfer moment. Yeah, but when we're also showing that we're human, because there is such a interesting dynamic in being a therapist to client relationship, is you're telling me all about you, and I know details about your life that maybe nobody else knows, but you might not know anything about me.
Yeah.
And using those little moments that are appropriate, like as the therapist, and what I'm sharing or disclosing about myself seems to create like a lot of that. Yeah, like we're both human. Like this is normal. And like you're getting to see like, oh, okay, like she's getting dive bombed by cicadas every day too. And like this is disgusting and impacting her life. Like just like it's impacting my life too. Like I don't go untouched. And I think a lot of people have this mindset sometimes, because I've gotten feedback from clients, like they'll make little comments of like thinking that I have it all figured out, or that like I'm not touched by anxiety or stress or relationship issues or whatever it might be across the board. Because I'm a therapist, like I'm perfect. So getting to dull that down and be like, nope, we're here together.
Yeah. Yeah, I think clients just want, and people in general, want to feel understood.
Yeah.
And that understanding comes from, especially in places of vulnerability, am I going to be understood here?
Yeah.
Am I going to belong here? Am I going to be accepted here?
Right.
And yeah, so much of that is just meeting a human, not meeting a therapist.
That's really well said.
What do you think it looks like to be an active participant in life?
Ooh. That's also like a really great advice point that I've gotten. I don't remember where that quote came from. Somebody has said that quote, but my best friend Maddie, shout out, she uses that quite often in her therapy practice. Being an active participant in your life is pretty self-explanatory. It is taking ownership, responsibility for you. If you want something to be different, take the steps, take the action to make something different for yourself.
how do you feel like someone does that? If they feel like in the current moment, I don't have the room to change, I can't change, how do you take that first step to know that you have the ability to do that?
Yeah. Well, it would be a lot of background work there of identifying what is causing them to feel like they can't change and building up the strength and confidence that change is possible. And it is kind of like a baby step, like baby steps in that beginning phase. But seeing like what is in their control. Because I think that's what happens so often is we can get in these places of just like tunnel vision, just like get these blinders on. We're like, this is it. We can't do anything about it. We're controlled by external forces. And there are some environments and some situations where like they're out of our control and like we might not have a lot of say over that. But I do believe like there's at least always maybe at least something, even if it's really small, that we can do. So starting to shift the perspective and ask the question of, okay, like what is actually in your control here? And asking that to a client and seeing where that might be for them.
Yeah. Walk me through how you do that with a client. If I'm one of your clients and I say, I feel like my life's out of control, I don't control anything. Walk me through what that would be like.
Well, probably just getting to understand like what is feeling out of control. Like maybe even just like laying everything out on the table, just like getting really specific about like what does your life look like? Where is the chaos? What things are feeling out of your control? And just kind of that's what the language I really like to use is like we're laying it out on the table and then we're just gonna look at it. We're just gonna maybe take a bird's eye view, just zoom out for a second, take a step outside of this and just look at everything. And create a little bit more clarity when you're outside of the tunnel vision or the chaos of it all.
I like that. I think for me, it's hard to be in something and to get that perspective of the bird's eye view.
Yeah.
I think that's a benefit of therapy and therapists like you, because you like to say, let's look at the whole picture. Let's not just look at what's going on right now. And in the therapy room, they're coming in and they're paying for a service to essentially fix an issue.
Right.
And so much of the therapy work isn't even on the issue. That makes sense.
It does.
It's so much of what else is going on.
Yeah.
What might you not be telling me that I need to know so that we can kind of address that?
Yeah.
So I like the bird's eye view.
Is that something that you use in your therapy practice?
Yeah, I use the Dr. Melanie Morris example of, as a therapist, we're in the car with the client as well as we're in the helicopter above.
Yep.
And we get to see the whole picture, the past, the future, the right now. And we're also the guide in the car, kind of nudging them. You should probably take that exit right there. Maybe let's pull off and take a break. Your check engine light's on. We should probably get that checked out.
Yeah.
So I do use that as the difference between what is my role? Well, my role is several things.
Right.
And I think, and I'm sure you felt this, but whenever I feel countertransference, other people might refer to it as imposter syndrome. I have to remember what my role is in the room.
Yeah.
My role isn't to be them. It's not to be like who they want to be.
Right.
It's to help guide them into who they want to be.
Yeah.
So.
Which is also bringing up this thought. Somebody had said this a little bit to me ago, a colleague or a supervisor, I don't remember, of like not getting attached to the outcome as a therapist and what your role is.
Yeah, that's hard though.
It is.
Because when you're a helper, you want to help people in a way that maybe you have envisioned is the best way to help.
Sure.
And humans are complex. I like that. Don't be attached to the outcome.
Well, in a lot of ways we can't. So then I think that's what starts to create a lot of bias as well.
Tell me more.
Like that countertransference and bias, I think could lead to maybe more of a harmful guiding process. That is what you said, like, oh, this is my best idea of like how you should be helped. Like this is what you should do. And just even hearing like those shoulds come out of my mouth, I'm like, well, that's not what therapy's for.
Yeah.
That's not me to tell you what you should or shouldn't do.
So how do you balance that with, I want to get rid of my anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
Our goal is to get rid of the anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you balance, don't get attached to the outcome of you want to get rid of your anxiety while also working on getting rid of your anxiety?
Maybe sometimes it's learning to live with the anxiety. Like maybe we can't get rid of it, but we're learning to live with it and accept that it is present.
When it comes to belonging,
Mm-hmm.
if I'm looking for a place to belong, where should I start?
Gosh, another good piece of advice that somebody told me recently. Another shout out to Maddie. This is her boss and her supervisor where she's working right now. Her name's Amy. And they were having this exact conversation about belonging and fitting in. And coming from a Christian perspective, Amy was talking about we were never created to like fit in. And maybe there's a difference here between belonging and fitting in. But she used this metaphor of like a dollar bill. Like a dollar bill is worth the same whether it's like so crisp and clean in your wallet or if it's crumpled up in the dumpster. The worth of the dollar bill doesn't change. And so she was tying this idea of like fitting in and worth in with the cross of if your worth is placed horizontally, like it's not standing very firm, but when it's placed vertically in Christ and kind of then connecting this with the cross, like the cross can stand alone with the vertical piece of wood. And so when you're placing your worth not horizontally, vertically, then like it's really solid in that. And so like tying that all the way back to fitting in, I would get really curious with somebody about like where's your identity being placed in? Like what are you placing your worth in? And where are you trying to find like belonging or fitting in? Because maybe it's not necessarily like a community of people is thus when you find belonging, but maybe when you're really sure of yourself and have confidence and stability and a high sense of self-worth, then do you feel like you belong?
Yeah, tell me more of that. I think the conception is belonging means you're a part of people.
Right.
But tell me more of what you were just saying. Kind of expand on that.
Yeah. Like maybe belonging isn't having to be a part of a group or like having friendships. Like these are all really great things that I hope we all have, like definitely create a higher quality of life. And at the same time, I think maybe like the sense or like need of belonging might not be as present if you are like belonging to yourself to a degree. Does that make sense? Because then it also gets tricky too. Like you open up the whole conversation about, religion and faith and spirituality of, okay, well, what if somebody doesn't have that or want that or believe in that? Then like, what does belonging look like for them?
Yeah, I think that sense of belonging, whenever that question is posed, it's, I don't feel like I'm a part of something, so I need to belong somewhere. Or every time I've tried to fit in,
Right.
maybe I haven't fit in.
Which is kind of saying like, okay, well, let me wait to get a part of this group to then feel good about myself. Which is like, okay, well, what if we eliminate like the external and like, what if you did something internal? Well, then you wouldn't maybe need to be seeking out all these external things. And yeah, like then you would be a part of a group at some point, whatever. But I think you being a part of a group, once you have security in who you are, then can you actually be present in the group versus like getting like sucking out what you are from the group. And maybe this sounds negative, but like kind of in a selfish way, like it doesn't allow you to be present with those friendships or in the community, whatever it might be.
Yeah, because your end goal is to feel good.
Yeah.
It's not to help others, to make others feel good. Not that you need to make other people feel good, but I think when you're naturally serving and being a helper, you do make other people feel good.
Sure.
Like earlier when you were talking about I want to create a safe space, you didn't want to sound boastful or prideful, but I don't think that's a bad thing when you're doing something good for someone else.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's most feel that sense of belonging when they don't have that spiritual piece. Because it's that like ache inside of every human that we're meant to be a part of something that we're now separate from.
Right.
So I'm curious, for you personally, like, how do you integrate your faith into what you do every day, whether that's work, play, so on and so forth?
Yeah. Work has been one that I've not had to navigate more so recently, but early on, especially in the grad program, like trying to understand what that meant, what that looked like, and felt really confused with that concept of like, oh, like putting this on the shelf and then I'm like going into work and I'm just like, I don't feel like a whole person. Like now I don't feel like I'm authentic, which does not let me do my job very well. But I learned and kind of grew to understand that like I don't have to say Jesus' name. Like I don't have to talk about God to be honoring God or like allow that to still be authentic and true to me. And so the way that I use that in my work is by creating a safe space, like in using the gifts that I feel like God has given me, like in my work with the people that I interact with. And the same is true like in play and stuff like that. But it might look a little bit different outside of work because I can be a little different minded and maybe be more present in a different way with that aspect of things, like in cooking or being outside or being with friends. And maybe the conversations get to be different too there.
Yeah, it sounds like the intention is different.
That's the word. Yeah.
Yeah. How does someone develop that intentionality? Like, how do you become a more intentional person?
That's a really good question. I think a good bit of that can come from just slowing down. But you might ask, how does one slow down? I could see it also coming from creating awareness too. Kind of all the things we've been talking about, they to me, they seem like to all be tying in. Creating awareness, the chaos, the control, being an active participant in your life. I think all leads to being more intentional and being more mindful. Because yeah, like how do you become intentional about something that you don't know what you need to be intentional about?
Yeah, awareness. And even there's a book, it's on my shelf, Atomic Habits by James Clear.
Oh, yeah.
And he talks about how awareness is always the first step because you can't change a habit if you're not aware of the habit.
Exactly.
Then I kind of turn the phrase and say, you can't, that what you're not aware of, you can't change.
Mm-hmm.
And so once we hit that like almost like metacognition level of thinking about our thoughts, thinking about the way we move,
Yeah.
things that separate humans from animals.
Mm-hmm.
Once we start doing that, you get the chance to actually kind of become the author of your steps.
Right.
When it comes to like anxiety, how do you help someone kind of get out of their anxious thoughts and anxious tendencies?
Mm-hmm. Something that I've been using a little bit lately around that, it sounds condescending, and me and my clients will talk about it. We'll be like, this sounds condescending, but let's just simplify it. And it's been working for a good bit of them of just like, anxious for what? Stressed for what? For why? And just really like dulling it down to such a simple version, and like those anxious thoughts and just bringing them really low and just simplifying them seems to be doing something.
Yeah.
But what you were saying brought up that thought, like just get out of your head, which is another thing. It's like, okay, like let's lay all of it out on the table and let's take a step back and look at it. And we can examine, like what's the truth here and what are the lies that are coming from anxiety. Yeah. And that's another way to get some clarity, get outside of some anxiety.
Yeah, rumination is big. Like especially with depression, like as a CBT believing therapist, like biggest thing number one is rumination. Yeah. Like how do we get out of your head? How do we get you acting? How do we get you to become an active participant in your life? Same with anxiety. How do we stop the spiral? Right. Well, you have to be aware that you're doing it. Yeah. Get curious as to why it's happening. Yeah. And then figure out ways to hit a pause on it. And I love I love boundaries.
Yeah.
Because I think boundaries can help kind of delineate between where's the anxiety coming from, who is causing my anxiety, why is it happening. And I may have shared this analogy with you before. I like analogies, but I call it the house analogy. And with my clients, I walk through how your house is this place where you're not going to let everybody in.
Right.
But you let so many people into the house of your mind. So how do we then start to think of our brain as a house when it comes to boundaries?
Yeah.
So who in my normal day-to-day life would I like leave at work? They're not coming near my house.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I probably shouldn't think about them when I'm at home. Who gets to come right up to the edge of my nice fence? Who gets to be in the front yard? Who's on my porch? Where are the areas in my house that even my closest friends don't get to come in? And those boundaries aren't there to keep other people out. Those boundaries are there to know how much I can handle and how much I want to share.
Yeah.
So when anxiety starts to creep in of, oh, why'd that person say that about me? Or what if I did this wrong? Maybe I'm just not good enough.
Yeah.
Thinking in terms of boundaries of, okay, well, that can stay at the front door.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to come into my house.
Yeah.
But I'm curious as to what your thoughts are on that.
No, I love that. But something even before you said that, creating awareness, getting curious, and examining those thoughts. Another thing that has been helpful is this idea of like facing it head on. And that's what made me think of that when you were talking about getting curious of the thoughts and examining it. And tying that with kind of like the simplification of anxious thoughts is facing it head on. And when we look at things head on and call it out for what it is, it becomes a lot less scary. And we see that it is maybe a lot smaller than what it actually is. And so also kind of like eliminating some fear around anxiety or the ruminating thoughts, the spiraling thoughts. And when you name what it is, okay, well, then we know like where the spiral starts or like what it's going to look like. And we can know that like, oh, we can handle this. Because maybe we can't like fix anxiety. Like maybe sometimes we can't fix it or like eliminate it altogether. But maybe now we know that we can and are capable of calling it out or sitting through it and it not causing us to spiral or deteriorating the rest of our day.
Yeah. People mention how there's like little T trauma and big T trauma. Can you explain that difference and then how you really go about treating both of those?
Honestly, like I'm not very mindful about like little T and big T in my day-to-day practice. I mean, I could probably like give you an explanation on it, but it's not something that I really use like a description for. But I mean, I would say like to me, it's so hard to explain these things that feel self-explanatory to me, you know, that we like learned.
Well, in your practice, what do you do with trauma then?
Well, I'm EMDR trained, so I do use EMDR.
What does that mean?
EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, and it was founded based off of big T trauma in the use of PTSD with war veterans. So using bilateral stimulation, which is the eye movements, so moving your eyes side to side, is this bilateral movement that is accessing the left and right side of your brain. So basically, you're bringing out a memory, a traumatic event, we'll say, just like hypothetically, like we're bringing out a hypothetical traumatic memory. Bringing that out of your brain by like, I would ask you a couple questions, just get it on the forefront. And then we would do this bilateral stimulation back and forth that's pretty rapid. And that allows your brain to talk back and forth to itself, which is allowing it to have the chance to fully process it. So trauma is stored fragmented in the brain. And that's why you might have flashbacks or nightmares or it comes up suddenly, is because it's not processed thoroughly. So it's just giving your brain a chance to actually process the information. Walking is a form of bilateral stimulation, so is running. So that's why you might find if you're going on a walk, like you might think really clearly or be able to process just like your day. Or I always find like, okay, if I like know I'm going to have a hard conversation, or maybe I just had a hard conversation, like, oh, I need to go for a walk. Even before I understood the concept of bilateral stimulation, like that was something, a practice that I would use that was really helpful in processing and understanding things.
I really thought you were going to suggest that we should do an example of EMDR right now. So I was thinking of my trauma, but
Big T or little T?
we'll find out. No, yeah, that's interesting. I think trauma, there is real trauma. I also have the opinion that there's things that aren't trauma that people are now attributing as trauma.
It definitely is a buzzword as well. It can be used as a buzzword.
Yeah, I think that's where that like little T and big T comes from.
Right. But is the little T meaning that it's like not actually trauma, or is the little T meaning like it's trauma, but it's not like trauma? You know what I mean? Because then wouldn't everything be little T trauma?
I think you're asking good questions. I don't know if I'm the expert on
Should we get Dr. Morris in here?
Yeah, let's get all the experts that we know.
Yeah.
We'll get an expert panel.
Okay, yeah.
It'll be great.
Yeah, I don't know.
But yeah, like that idea of not everything is traumatic.
Yeah.
But going to therapy is important because then you can say, was this trauma? Can you tell me if it was?
Yeah.
If it was, is that something we can work through? If it wasn't, then what is it then? Because I think those buzzwords we can attach to and then just think that we have it. Like, autism is a big buzzword right now. Mm-hmm. Everyone thinks they have it because of TikTok.
Yeah.
When probably not.
Sure.
Like, just because you do certain behaviors doesn't mean you're autistic.
Right.
Just because you do certain behaviors doesn't mean you're OCD.
Right.
And so it's having that like expert opinion that I think is important.
Yeah, definitely. I would say I don't navigate, like I don't have to navigate that. I don't think I ever really have, because I am EMDR trained and like have a good bit of training in trauma, and that's advertised on my professional pages. The people that are reaching out to me have big T trauma. So I'm not sure if I've ever even had a client say that they have trauma that like really isn't, or they were trying to understand like, is this trauma or is this not?
Mm. For me, it feels very social media based because I haven't dealt with that either as clients.
Yeah.
But I've heard other therapists talk about it on social media. Like, here's what we're seeing in the landscape.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any specific words that you tend to live by?
Intentionality is definitely one of them. Joy. I mean, I'm thinking of like these words, but they might not be like an action step word, like intentionality. That's kind of like an action step word. But then I'm thinking of things like peace, where it's like, maybe that's not like an action step word, but those are things that I work towards to have in my life.
How do you work towards those?
With intentionality.
Great. How do you be intentional working towards those?
Just creating space for me to not just be a therapist, like having hobbies, getting to play, like interacting with friends, going out, trying new foods, cooking, the things that bring me peace, the things that bring me joy and that fill my cup back up. And I guess like kind of creating some boundaries around that, but setting the intention of all of that to exist. Because it can be really easy to just like get swept up in work, get swept up in, like we said, like getting that tunnel vision and not being able to get outside of your head. So just like zooming out and being intentional and mindful about that. See like, oh, like I actually do have a lot of time. I think time is something that can really create a lot of stress, at least for me sometimes. Like, oh, I don't have time to do that. And then when I zoom out, I'm like, wait a minute, you have so much time. You can definitely go do this or spend time doing that, whatever it is. But just kind of slowing down in that mindset.
Yeah. One question I've tried to ask more recently is, what do you think that your obituary would say? And if you don't know, what do you want it to say?
Well, what's the question? What I think it will say, or what I want it to say?
We'll go with what do you want it to say when you eventually pass? Lord willing, when you're like 150.
I don't want to live that long.
Okay.
I think I'm good with maybe 80.
Got it.
I feel like maybe 85.
I'll note that.
Okay. What about you? Are you trying to live to 150?
I don't know. I'll live till however long I live till.
I mean, yeah, like same. Anyway, well, your last question swept into this question really well. I hope people say that want it to say, like, I was a joyful person, that I was one that lived with intentionality. But yeah, I want it to say the gifts that I believe God has given me were used, and that people experienced that from myself.
Because, yeah, you're aware of how you want to live. You're aware of who you want to be.
Yeah.
And maybe you have a grand vision for life. Maybe you don't, but you understand it's lived in the present. Because tomorrow's not guaranteed.
Yeah.
The past can't be lived.
Yeah.
It's just right now. I like that. Any parting thoughts?
No, this was really nice.
All right. Well, thanks for being on again. I always appreciate your time.
Yeah, this is awesome. Thanks for having me.